I was flying into LA for the first time ever to finish my lunch part for Black Bandit Media. And so it was my first time ever being in LA.
John Lyke, welcome to California.
California sucks.
Oh, no, come on.
We should redo that one and I'll say it rules.
Okay. Hey, John, welcome to California.
California rules!
Mike Dempsey from our crew, I was coming to meet him. He picked me up at the airport the night before. I was, kind of jet lagged or whatever. I hadn't put on my skates in a bit. And I was living in Vermont, and I think at the time my girlfriend was the one that would come out and film me, or sometimes I'd rope her little brother in to come film me for that section. Casey Garrity was doing the same thing with his girlfriend down in Connecticut, which was funny. So this was one of those sections where our crew was all around, living all different places in the US. So we kind of just had to makeshift put our sections together. And then I flew out to LA where Mike was filming. He had been filming with Brandon Negrete and that crew a bunch. So day one, I flew in the night before. I wake up. We probably partied too. Probably woke up hungover. And Mike's like, yo, we're going to go meet Brandon Negrete and Chris Haffey. And Chris Haffey's been one of my favorite skaters. That's why I skated Rems for a while in my early skate sections. We had his posters on the walls. His sections were big. He's always been one of my favorite skaters. And I'd never met him before, and I hadn't really met a lot of skaters at this point. I never really went to a lot of competitions. I was always working, so while everyone else knew everyone else in our crew, I was kind of the lone wolf that was just you'd see me in the videos, but then you'd never meet me anywhere. And so anyway, I'm out there. We meet up with Brandon Negrete and Haffey, and they're like, all right, we're going to Walnut High, which I didn't know what it was. So we show up, and it's this massive 20-something set with the highest handrail. And Chris just puts on his blades immediately and just starts, they're filming for Regardless. And Haffey is like, hey, could you watch Cars for me? Because Dempsey's filming and Brandon Negrete's filming. And so I'm there watching Cars because the rail kind of shoots you into the street. So I'm standing there watching Cars for Haffey, which I'm already ecstatic about. I'm like, cool. And he's murdering this rail. He's doing regular front torque, switch torque. He's just doing all these tricks first try so easily. And then he's trying to get this 270 back torque. You'll see he has 270 back farf in the video, but he's doing 270 back torque on this massive rail. But the most impressive part is he's doing it a bunch and not landing it and not falling. He's going into the 270 back torque, which is a switch torque because he had just front torqued it with his left foot and grabbed it. And now he's doing it with his right foot with 270. And he keeps putting his foot down to safety, 270 back farf, even though he could hold it. He does half the rail and then just taps it down, just doing it so safe. The opposite of how I do that trick. I either make it or I die. And I would never do it on something big. I'm talking about even on a P rail. I either do it or I die. And so I've been watching Cars, and he's getting a bunch of different clips. He kind of warms up on this rail. And so while I'm watching him do clips, I'm sitting there. I'm all excited. I'm in California, and I'm looking at the stair set, and I'm like, I think I want to jump this thing. But in my head, I'm like, but is that just because Chris Haffey's here? And I'm just want to be like Chris Haffey, and I'm going to jump this thing and break both my legs. And they're just going to be like, Mike Dempsey, who the hell did you bring out here? What is this kid doing? Can't be doing that. So the whole session for Chris was probably 45 minutes because it's a big rail. So, you get one hit, but then you fly down. It takes over a minute or two for him to reset and get another hit, So he's been skating this thing for 45 minutes. And I'm watching Cars for him, giving him the thumbs up or down, dapping him up, being like, yo, that was sick. And he's like, oh, what do you think about this? And I'm playing it as cool as I can. I'm acting oh, yeah, it's just another blader. But I am floored. I'm watching Cars with Chris Haffey, the little kid in me, so excited. And while I'm watching it, I'm looking at the set and being like, I think I want to jump it. And every 5 minutes, I go through waves of, yep, I'm definitely going to do it. I think I'm going to jump it. And then 5 minutes later, I'm definitely not. This thing's way too big. I'm not going to have Haffey watch Cars. I'm just going to get hurt day one in California. You haven't put on skates in a few days. And the first thing you're going to do is just jump a 20 set? You're not even warmed up. You haven't even had your skates on yet. What are you thinking? And then I just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And luckily, Haffey finished the session in a moment where I was like, I think I'm going to do it. And he looks at me and he's like, hey, you want anything here? I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to jump it. He's like, oh, okay. I just said it so casually, as if like, yeah, I think I'm gonna jump it. And he's just like, oh, okay. And I'm like, yep. And then, so I'm like, I walk up to Brandon Negrete and Dempsey as if like I do this all the time, which this is by far the biggest gap I've ever done. So I'm like, hey, playing it cool. I'm like, hey guys, I think I'm going to zero spin the set. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, you know, and they're like, we'll grab the angles. I'm like, cool. I'm just going to warm up over here. And there's like, I think like a 14 set or a 12 set nearby. And so I like 180 that a few times, and my heart's racing, not only for the trick, but also like Chris Haffey's like, yeah, I'll watch Cars for you. So I got Chris Haffey watching Cars for me. And I'm like, all right, I warm up. I'm like, all right, I'm going for it. And in my head, I usually like sing like hype up songs sometimes in my head. And I'm singing his 4x4 section when he does the fakie 7 on El Toro. I'm literally singing that like in my head, like to the beat, but like not saying it out loud, like while he's there. Like that's how much I'm fanboying. Rosemary. And I go and I'm flying at this set, and I'm just going as fast as I can because like this is by far the biggest thing I've jumped. So while I'm looking at it as it's doable, I'm like, you know, you don't know how much speed you need the first hit. And I come in, I drop fakie, and I just fly. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to stomp it. I feel so good in the air. I'm about to stomp it, but it's way bigger than I thought. But I'm like, all right, I'm landing perfectly. And I land and just explode backwards on the landing. Like, and I thought I was going to land it. I'm like, shit. I'm like, all right, I got this. And I just keep going up. And in my head, I'm like, am I just going to keep falling and like get hurt? And that's, like I said earlier, I was like, is Chris Haffey and Brandon Negrete just going to be like, why? Like, what's this kid doing? He's clearly trying to show off for us. He's really just scaring us is what he's doing. We really would appreciate it if he'd stop doing this gap. It's scaring the hell out of us. But they're all playing. I'm playing it cool. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I almost had it, you know? And in my head, I'm like, fuck, that was huge. But I keep setting up and I keep eating shit. I just keep falling and falling and falling on this gap. Just like, and you see it in the edit in my lunch section at the end, I have like a bunch of falls where I just land and just explode back, and I'm rolling back and I'm like, all right, I don't know what to do. I'm starting to get tired. I'm like, if I don't land like this next one, like it's just not going to work. Like my legs are shot. And I'm talking with Chris about it. I'm like, yeah, every time I feel like I'm going to stop it. And he's like, he just gives me a tip. He's like, oh yeah, you just got to like lean more forward than you think. And I'm like, okay. And forward as in the sense of like I'm landing backwards. So like lean like this. He's like, yeah, because it's so big that like when you land on your toes, your momentum just like carries you this way. I'm like, all right. And so I'm still singing Chris Haffey's 4x4 section. I think it's Inner Pool. Forget the name. It's like, why can't we just look? And so I'm mobbing at it, and I go and I just do a big fakie. I do the rocket air to stall myself out. And I just lean so far forward. And while I'm in the air, I feel like I'm going to land in a belly flop. Like I feel like I'm leaning so forward that if I did that over like a 4-set or something, without a doubt, like I would just completely face plant like so quickly. But he was right. I like fully stomped it perfectly because leaning forward like just kicked enough where like it stopped me up. I just landed it perfectly, and I'm like, fuck you, like all hyped up. And then I got embarrassed about that because I'm like, oh, I'm like swearing. I was like, he didn't do that when he stomped his trick. He wasn't swearing. He was like, yeah, he played it cool as if like this is just everything. So the adrenaline was there. I was hyped, and it was great because I was like, oh wow, I just got my ender for my part, and I have another like 2 or 3 weeks in California. Like everything's gravy. Like I don't, you know, I could, with that ender, I was like, yeah, I could put together the most mediocre part, but I still have that ender, and an ender will make a part. They say that about movies where a movie can have like an okay beginning, a shitty middle, but if it has a great ending, that's all people remember. And yeah, I got that part, and then and then we went to another spot, right after that. And I felt so great because we went to another massive spot. It was like an 18 stair where he's doing this massive wall ride, like riding the wall, jump like 180, ride the wall, fakie, cab out. He's also, and he just goes there and he's like, it's like right around the corner. He's like, oh, I think I'm going to get this clip. And I'm like looking at stuff to skate there. And I'm like, nah, I don't think I'm going to skate. Because in my head, I'm like, I'm golden. I just proved myself. Like, and Brandon Negrete was so hyped up. Dempsey was so hyped up. Like, Haffey was hyped after he landed it. And he's like, yeah, like, that's sick. He's like, and Haffey goes, he's like, yeah. I was like, Brandon Negrete goes, did you ever skate that gap? And he's like, I think I 180'd it back in the day. And I was just like, I was like, yeah. He's like, they're like that. And Brandon Negrete goes, texted someone. He goes, I just texted someone. He's like, that was the biggest zero spin I've seen in like a long time. So I felt like I proved myself. Not that I needed to. In my head, I needed to. But it felt cool. After that, anytime I went skating with them, I never felt like I needed to prove myself or anything. I was like, all right, I just stomped one of the best tricks ever. They saw it. I acted like it was no big deal. And yeah, we just went street skating, and then we met up a couple times later. But that was the first time. And then me and Dempsey were laughing about it because he was thinking the same thing. He was like, yeah. He's like, you're going to jump this set? Like, what are you thinking? He's like, but I was going to film it. I was like, do it. And we got home. I was like, yeah, I was so worried that like I was just going to get hurt. He's like, yeah, I didn't want to bring you to the hospital immediately. Like you get there. He's like, I was so nervous. But me and him were so hyped afterwards. It was cool. Anyway, that's the story. It's if you land it right, you shouldn't feel anything in your heels. Like I'll injure my heels jumping off a curb if I land off that curb wrong, you know, or like I'm sure you felt, anyone that skates has felt it when they just land weird and they feel it in their heels. Because like the way I land, like actually I have big wheel frames right here that will show. We'll use an example, but like you don't land flat like this. It's like when I do gaps, like you land like this. And on that gap, it felt like I landed like this, where it's like my toe, because I literally felt like I was going to face plant this way. And just the toe just catches, and then it like absorbs. And while you're doing that, you have like so much weight like in your toes that when it comes down, it's like by the time that heel comes down, it really was like all in the body and everything. So I didn't really feel... Like I didn't feel it. Like if anything, I think my legs, my like hamstrings would have felt it. But I was young. I was like 23 or something, 22 maybe. So my body was like much better than it is now. Now I was talking with Alex Braskow like 2 months ago, and we were laughing about like gaps these days, and like we were talking, I think about like the Hollywood 16 or something, and how like he was saying, he's like, yeah, I like fakie sevened it in the middle of a session, like when I was like 17. And we were laughing about how like now it's like you do a gap nowadays, it's like, all right, you have 5 tries. You're not going to be able to walk for like a week. You're going to feel every single one. And it's not going to be like an injury. It's not going to be like, oh, my knee or my heel. It's just going to be like my legs feel like someone took a baseball bat to them, even though I didn't fall, even though I landed it. It's just like, that is just a lot. Yeah, that, which means like bigger El Toro, I guess, or that's what they'd call it. Anyone that speaks Spanish is going to be like, you are butchering that so bad. You're not even close. Because it was like 10 years ago. But yeah, I remember they called it that. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll take it. I have not, because I think it's in like Arizona or something. So I'm sure it is then. Yeah. I've never been there. No, but I don't need to. It would be cool to get like hit a handrail, get like a basic clip. That wouldn't even be a clip, you know. I'm fine with that. I don't need the El Toro. That's what they said. Yeah. But I've never been. So someone that's been to both will be like, that's bullshit. But it could be. The gap could be too. And they also could be referring to like the massive handrail, which is hands down like bigger than a normal handrail. It's like the biggest handrail I've ever seen. It's like weirdly, like you walk and you feel like you're a little kid. Yeah, I mean, if I'm competing against him, he definitely wins. That I mean, that one's on a whole nother level because once you get to gaps, it's like the way I measure stair sets or gaps usually is I like stick my hand up, so I stand next to it and then I gauge the distance between my hand and like the top stair. Like there's that Pretty Sweet set in Echo Park in Los Angeles. There's like a skateboard video, Pretty Sweet, that it's like an iconic drop rail. I did a front torque grab on it and won. Nigel Houston had a cover of him blunting it on Thrasher. Pretty Sweet did like a whole intro video, the skateboard company. It's like a super iconic set. Nick Taylor 180'd it in one of our videos. And that's like gauging, like I gauge everything based off of that set. So like, yeah, I've jumped stuff and like the difference between like 6 inches on a gap is so big when you're jumping, like when it's like you start to get up to those levels where you're kind of just like imploding on the landing, like that extra little step or something. Like the difference between a 20 set and a 21 set is fairly significant because it just really, it's kind of like a handrail, it's the difference between a handrail being 2 inches higher. It's like, oh, it's just this much higher is huge, huge. So. Oh, no, for sure not. Younger me, probably. Younger me, probably, because I used to, like, even when I did that zero spin gap, like, I remember standing at the top of it and not thinking it was that big. It wasn't until I was in the air that I was like, oh, this is decent size. But I remember looking at it and being like, I could do this. But then looking at it from the bottom and looking at how many stairs, and I'm like, am I just out of it? Like, am I just out of touch? Because I think I've jumped stuff off of stuff when I was like 13 or 14. It's probably similar height to that 25 set. Like when we used to just climb on roofs that were like, God, so tall, like 14 feet and stuff like that, like just like massively tall. And you'd roll off going 0 miles an hour and just eat shit. Or like I used to snap axle bolts all the time when I was younger doing the big gaps where they just break, they just snap, like the metal would just snap in half. So like I don't do that anymore and I don't do gaps like that. So John, me, no, definitely not. I'm not trying to jump big stuff as much unless it's in like a cool creative line or something. But even then, I'm like a good 15 pounds heavier than I was.
I'm in my like early 20s. I shouldn't be getting this.
You couldn't help yourself.
I know.